Next up, we've got one of our own. I'm going to bring up Mossy O'Mahony, who's our Chief Product Strategist. Mossy's going to do two things. He's going to lead a discussion with one of our customers, Health South, and he's also going to talk about how you can get more from the Poppulo solution. So without further ado, I don't know if I see Mossy. There he is! Come on down, Mossy.
Hello, Chicago. How's everyone doing? Great. So, hopefully you're not going to have too much trouble understanding me with my thick accent, but unfortunately that is one of the limitations of live presentations. They can't put subtitles on me. So we've got a great session coming up for you. I'm going to be chatting with Lindsay and Alyssa from Health South about how they transformed the communications function at their organization into a strategic one using a data-driven approach. So maybe just a little bit about Health South before we get going. It's one of the leading healthcare providers in the US, so they've over 37,000 employees spread across 36 states and 350 hospitals. Now, the company's gone through a lot of acquisitions in recent years, and they're actually just preparing for a rebrand to encompass health at present, so that's a big change. And this morning, I'm going to chat with Lindsay and Alyssa about their exciting journey, about how they adopted a data-driven approach to transform the comms function into that of a strategic advisor at their organization. So, would you please give a very warm welcome on stage to Lindsay and Alyssa from Health South. Welcome up here. We'll have to replay. Welcome. Great stuff, guys. Well, I hope it's a bit like a counseling session with the chaise longue, and hopefully this is going to be therapeutic. So, where have you guys come in from today?
So we are coming from Birmingham, Alabama. We are part of the internal communications team at Health South.
Excellent stuff. Well, look, thanks for joining us. So maybe to kick us off and to get started, Lindsay, I thought it might be helpful for the room here if you could actually tell us a little bit about the comms team and the comms structure at Health South and how that all came to be.
Sure. So we are a super lean team. You heard it in our introduction. We have over 37,000 employees. So for that amount of employees and over 350 locations, we have 7 full-time communication team members. So we have 4 dedicated to the internal team and 3 on the external team. So on the internal team, I serve as the director of communications. Alyssa is a communications manager. And then we have another communications manager who is an editor of publications and does some special assignment writing. And then we have another communications coordinator who's in the trenches writing. So that makes up our team. And the internal communications team at Health South is relatively new. It's about 5 or 6 years old. It came to be, we saw a need to really enhance how the company communicated with employees, and we took that opportunity. And through a series of quick wins and keeping an eye on our long-term strategy, we built what we have today. So we were able to add those 2 additional team members to myself and Alyssa. They wish they could be here today, but they are out doing some work on the rebrand project. And then we hope to add another team member by the end of the year.
Okay, wow, great. So that's quite a journey that it sounds like you've traveled in the last couple of years. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what was comms like at Health South, before you changed your approach to the one that you use now, the more data-driven approach.
Yeah. So we were order takers. I'm sure many in this room have felt that at some point in their career, and our day-to-day work was driven by other people's needs, and we essentially were just kind of churning along, not really thinking about what we were doing, why we were doing it, and how it tied back to the company strategy.
Yeah, so as Lindsay mentioned, we kind of moved from that reactive approach to being more proactive and working with our business partners or their department contacts to better manage our time, but then also theirs. So a good example of that is many of y'all might go through annual benefits enrollment every single year. So as a cyclical project like that, we took advantage of that and decided, instead of waiting for that team to come to us, normally at the last minute, with what they needed, we were more proactive and sat down with them a few months in advance. And we've been doing that for the past couple of years to make sure that we learn more about the specific benefits offerings that they'll be including that year, any questions that could come up from employees. And so taking that approach has helped us, especially with that team, instead of being an order taker and just pushing out emails, to coming up with a strategic communication plan that fits for the employees' needs, not just HR's needs.
So guys, I mean, when you decided you needed to change from that approach, you know, how did you figure out where to start?
So that was about 5 or 6 years ago, and the best set of data we had at that point was our employee engagement survey. So we added some communication, or added questions around communications, and we looked at the answers and the responses. And while it wasn't bad, we knew we could do better. So we thought, you know, what are some additional ways we can get some input there?
So we started with focus groups. We went out to all of our operating regions and talked to our employees. I mean, they know how they want to receive information. So we took the engagement scores and compared that with those focus groups and figured out how they actually want to be communicated with.
So did this kind of help you maybe identify some of the gaps, or, you know, the things that you needed to do, and then, you know, kind of the business case or the request that you needed to make of the organization?
Yeah, communications. So our former CEO, he retired at the end of last year. Communications was one of his things. He was a very strong communicator, and we wanted to play to that. So the findings from the focus groups revealed that not only could we improve our messaging, but we could also improve how we delivered our messages, whether whether we think more mobily and just how we wanted to approach that.
So we also realized that we just needed to improve our email communications. As many of you probably can relate, we get asked to send out a lot of information, and everybody assumes, I'm seeing nodding heads, everyone assumes that email's the best way to do that. So we tried to find some vendors that would help us with that. And so when we started working with Poppulo, it gave us data to tell people no. It's a wonderfully empowering word. But instead of just saying no and stopping there, we were able to then offer them alternative solutions for some of the things that they were requesting.
And what else did you guys look at? So out of the focus groups, or did you go back and do more research to see what other challenge areas or gaps that you had?
Sure. So we love to listen to our employees. As I mentioned, understanding how they work and how they tick can really better reach them with the messages that you're sometimes forced to send to them. So what we did was, a couple of years ago, we listened again, and then we started these personas. So many of the speakers today have talked about personas and the importance of them, and we found them extremely helpful to identify the different employee segments of our staff. So for example, nurses, therapists, we started with those groups because they're the largest of our, we are a healthcare organization, so they're the largest of our staff member groups. But we also looked at some of like housekeeping, our corporate office staff, remote corporate office staff. So they all like to be communicated with in different ways. Some through, they have preferred channels, so we included those on the persona graphics, and then also timing. So for example, our night shift nurses, we discovered through this research that the best time to reach them, that they may actually get to check their email, is 3 a.m. So we're not sending emails at 3 a.m., but we understand then that if we send something at 9 o'clock in the morning one day, they may not get to it until later that night. And so understanding the cycle of how those metrics improve is wonderful.
And then to build on that a little bit more, and we'll touch on this later on as we continue talking, we'll show how we're using these employee personas coupled with other data to help our business partners communicate more strategically.
So that's interesting, guys. So, and the personas, I mean, this is a great resource. It's very progressive. I mean, anything else that was of interest? Did it show you any gaps in terms of how you were communicating with all your employees? What did you learn from developing these?
Sure. So it gave us insight to understand that 73% of our workforce is non-wired. They're not in front of a computer. They're not checking their email all day like many of us are. So we were able to make a case for a mobile app to communicate with them and reach them in that way.
And how has that changed how you communicate with all employees then? Has that had an impact on how you actually reach them?
So it really puts our communications in the palm of their hand, but not just from us as a more company-wide perspective, but we also gave opportunities for our hospital leadership to communicate to their specific staff through the app. And that has been wonderful. They had never before had a trackable way to communicate with their employees.
And Lindsay, tell me, I mean, did this change or make a difference in terms of, how you communicated back with your senior management in terms of having data on how these channels are performing?
Yeah, it changed the story. It changed how we talk or how we present information to our executive team. It changed how we present information to our stakeholders. With our executive team, the approach generally is short, concise, one-page data. They want to know our goals, how we're tracking against those goals, and then based on what we learned, how we're tweaking along the way. With our stakeholders and our corporate departments, it's more granular. We get into the weeds. We talk about open rates on emails. We talk about clicks on intranet pages. We could potentially share how another department rolled out an initiative and how that tracked along the way, and maybe how they could take inspiration from that. So we do employ different approaches for different audiences. And then another thing that we're keeping in mind along the way is how we can tie back what we're doing to company goals. As you know, there's a nationwide nursing shortage, and then coupled with that, nursing retention is a huge area of focus for the company.
Yeah,
So can I just maybe delve into that a little bit? I mean, how did this approach actually maybe change how you worked with other stakeholders, maybe with your business partners, or how you were perceived around the rest of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it really was, it was moving from that order taker role to the strategic advisor. It was being proactive. We were able to get in front of them before they came to us with a tactic that, may or may not work. It gave us opportunity to have conversations.
And so then, in terms of how you worked with other departments, Alyssa, did having this data to hand, did that change things?
I mean, yes, it did. It just gave us the opportunity, like I said before, to take it more initiative, to tell them, no, let's try it a different way. So that was very helpful. But then one of the biggest things that we really did to partner with some of our stakeholders and executive leadership was to create a campaign that linked back to nursing retention. So as Lindsay mentioned, there's a national nursing shortage. It is not something that's just in our segment of inpatient rehabilitation. It's everywhere. So what we did was we worked with our VP of Nursing and our Executive Vice President of Operations, regional presidents, and our HR leadership to develop what we call the Powered by Nurses campaign. So this is related to an organization-wide goal of reducing nursing turnover. It's not a communication goal. So that's the biggest piece there. We know that we cannot improve something as huge as turnover by sending a pretty email or putting something in the app. It's just not going to work. But instead, what we did was we put together a variety of resources from our various departments, from the various leadership teams, and merge that into a campaign and a program that we can then support through communications. So that campaign includes things that we can track like nursing sentiment, career development, recognition from their leaders, recognition company-wide, as well as communications. So all of those things then link back up to that company-wide goal of reducing nursing turnover.
So that sounds like actually quite a different approach. You were very focused on a strategic campaign as opposed to, by the sounds of things before, a lot of this reactive stuff when people were just coming to you and asking you to send stuff out. So that was quite a big change by the sounds of things. So did it have a change in how you worked with departments right the way across the organization?
Mm-hmm. So as we've mentioned, historically people just came to us and said, hey, can we send this email? I've already written it. It's great. And we would say, well, that might not be the best approach for your audience or for just the timing of what's going on in the organization. So now, by building relationships with our business partners, like I mentioned, sitting down with them, talking through a big program that they've got going on, they now come to us and say, hey, we want to roll out this initiative. We need your expertise to get it to the right staff, the right time. And they literally use that word, expert, which is wonderful. It's so
really is.
refreshing that they see us in that manner. We've worked really hard to get there. So they come to us in that way, and then we work with them to make sure that the timing of their communication is appropriate, that they're focusing on the right audience.
So you know, in terms of making this shift and starting to use the data in your conversations with them, did you change approach or develop any tools or processes in terms of working like that?
Yep. I think David gave a great example of one of these, but without knowing that someone like a David had an example of that, I came up with a template that we use to, when folks come to us and ask for requests, especially if they're not used to working with us in the manner that we've adjusted to. So it outlines some questions around who is your audience, what action are you trying to get folks to take, key messages, and then most importantly, what company-wide goal does this project, initiative, whatever it is, align with. So we ask them to answer those questions up front, and then we might sit down with them. And so if something doesn't align with one of the company goals, or is just too small of an audience that our small team can help with, the template also includes an outline for them to build their own communication plan, and then we're most happy to review that with more limited timing than if it were a larger campaign.
So Lindsay, that must have been, with senior stakeholders, was that a big shift? You know, how did they react to you guys wanting to work in this fashion?
We're very fortunate that our senior leadership team does see us in that strategic advisor role. So it wasn't difficult to get them on board, but I'd say the challenge probably comes more at the department level, kind of our business partners. A recent example of this is one came to me. She wanted to work on a video project. We all know how that goes. And she asked for support in writing a script for our CEO. So I took a moment and responded, very diplomatically and said, hey, let's discuss. Here's a list of, 4 questions I'd like you to answer, and then we can meet and talk. I had every intention of guiding that conversation in a way that, ended this video project. However, she answered them so well, she convinced me she never knew the wiser.
Right.
And we ended up putting together a really meaningful script for our CEO because she helped me understand the reason why. And then we even enhanced it further and were able to go out and get additional footage of our employees to complement this video. And it turned out to a very nice product at the end of the day.
So that sounds like really effective. It's a great process and an approach for doing these things. And when you started working in this fashion, I mean, Alyssa, did this have any knock-on effects in terms of the perception or the other ways that you work with different departments?
Sure. So I alluded to this a little bit before, but in terms of timing, now other folks come to us and ask, when is the best time to communicate this program? Or I'd really like to do this right now. Is there anything else big that's going on? Some ask those questions. Not all of them ask those questions. But having more data and having these tools behind us gives us the opportunity to say, well, the timing right now may not be quite right for this because it's annual enrollment season or it's performance evaluation season, and your message is just going to get buried under the things that employees actually need to be doing right now or want to be doing right now. So let's make this better for you and the employees and kind of adjust the timing. So that, I think, is the best.
Made a big impact,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So you guys, you sound quite the catalyst for change in terms of how you do things in your organization. I'm guessing by the sounds of things, you didn't just rest in your laurels at this point when you got people working in this fashion. What did you decide to do next?
So we wanted more data. So kind of beyond maybe email, we wanted to look at our other digital channels and think about how our email plus our intranet were performing together. And then we wanted to be able to slice and dice that data. And that's what piqued our interest in Poppulo's analytic software. So we worked closely with the Poppulo team. I believe it was about this time last year we were using their beta software for the analytics product that is available now. And to my knowledge, we were the first company to run a true analytics campaign. And by campaign, it goes beyond the digital channel reach. We also did a survey before the campaign. So to give you a little context on the campaign that we ran, it was for our Diversity Awareness Month, which is celebrated every October. And last October, we were unveiling the company's 3-year strategic plan. And we felt this campaign was a good fit, one, because the executives were aware of it, and two, it was a month long, so it was a manageable time period with a good amount of tactics where we really could learn about the software and how it could work for us, and then how it could in turn work for us to raise the profile of the work we do and the important work of our diversity council.
So you were keen, in this particular instance, if I recall correctly, in terms of understanding, well, look, before we do this, we want to know where things are, so that after we've run the campaign, really to help the organization understand what change has this brought about?
Exactly. In addition to having real-time reporting, so throughout the campaign, we could go in and we could look, if you want to flip back one or two more. So we pulled this after the campaign. You're looking at the post-campaign results. But throughout the campaign, we could go in and look and see how different locations were performing. We could see the high performers, which was great, and we could see the low performers. And that wasn't to get them in trouble. It was to know where we were potentially missing a location or missing a function. And that goes back to the employee personas. So say we were missing our dietary staff. We could see that real time and then go in and look at the persona from our dietary staff and go back and figure out maybe what are we doing, how can we adjust what's going on to meet the needs of that audience.
So that was quite a different way of operating, in terms of actually being able to see almost like this before and after effect from what you've done. How did you present this back to the organization afterwards?
So if you flip ahead, so this is the I guess this is the dashboard that you see on the Poppulo analytics when you're viewing your campaign view. So you see, if you look at some of the data, you can see the questions we asked before we unveiled the company's 3-year strategic plan for diversity. We asked about awareness and then alignment with daily work. And then you can see after the campaign, we sent it to a different random sampling of employees, and we moved the needle. And what I want to point out here, this was, in the beta software, this was a pilot with Poppulo, and it was also a pilot for us. We were looking to see if this would be a good fit, a good solution for us to move forward. So not only did we move the needle, we increased awareness, and I was very pleased to see that we, even more than the awareness, there was the link between your daily work and the 3-year strategic plan. But we also saw this was a great fit, and the stakeholders were engaged with this data. We showed the 3 things that you've seen kind of through this series of slides.
So that played well internally, actually being able to show back to your senior stakeholders the change or the difference that this has brought about.
Yeah, and the timing was wonderful too. This is the time of year annually that we put in money for budgets for the coming year. So we were able to make the case, we could show this and make the case to get the budget to officially purchase the Poppulo analytics software for this current year.
So just looking back at the totality of things that you've done there, it sounds like that you've really embedded using data into all facets and aspects of how you guys are actually working in the comms team. And I mean, it sounds like you use it to say no to things, which is really, really good use of it. It helps you get recognition from your business partners and senior stakeholders as well, right the way through to actually showing the outcome or the changes back to senior management in terms of the value. So what's next? Now that you've done all these things, where next for the comms team at Health South?
All right, so as Masi mentioned earlier, as he was introducing us, we're rebranding as Encompass Health. So we made this announcement July 10th of this year. You can see right here, and this is pulled out of the analytics software. You can see this, and it's an excerpt from an executive report we put together post-announcement, but we're able to show the messages we sent, the channels we were using, the reach, the views. So this is great. This is a great kind of quick takeaway from that announcement. But beyond that, and where our other 2 team members are today, they're in Dallas doing work to co-create values for the new brand. So when we roll out these values, we'll do something very similar to what we did for the Diversity Awareness Month campaign, where we work with a random sampling and send a message before and after to see how employees are embracing and understanding the company's new values.
So lots of big change on the horizon. Good. Guys, I think, I think it's very obvious for all the room to see here, you're very passionate about what you do. So maybe just to finish up in terms of, it'd be interesting if you could share, what motivates you, what kind of gets you out of bed in the morning to keep on improving what you're doing from a comms perspective?
Sure. I think the short answer is our employees. The long answer is that we're just lucky to work in a healthcare organization with management that supports what we're doing. But basically, we both really enjoy being able to do what we love in terms of communications that also impacts our staff who are at the patient bedside. We can work in healthcare without having to work physically with patients, which is great because that's not my thing. And so I'm gonna be honest, I can make a difference without having to be there. And so working with our staff, though, we get to tell their stories day in and day out. No 2 days are the same because we have more than 37,000 employees, and their stories are inspirational of how they're helping patients walk again, speak again, but also in terms of how they kind of come together when things like Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Irma impact our locations. Our regional president in Texas actually jokingly commented that through it all, we were not only running hospitals through a hurricane, but restaurants, hotels, even a zoo, as we're accommodating our patients and employees through that mess that really was. So being able to tell those inspirational stories company-wide is really what keeps us moving every day.
Well, look, guys, thanks so much for sharing those stories with us. It's been fantastic. So maybe before we open it up to the floor for Q&A, if I could ask you to give the ladies here a big round of applause.
A few questions from the app here, so why don't we start with those? I'll come up since you guys are on the therapist sofa over there. One of the questions is, what was the percentage of download? I guess a lot of folks have distributed employees and disconnected, and the concern is how many people will adopt a mobile app like that?
Okay, so we did a phased rollout approach starting in March of 2016. So we didn't just say, bam, 30,000 people, here you go. So it's taken us a little while to get through all of that. We finished that up at the end of last year. So since then, we've seen approximately 25% of downloads in our inpatient segment, which is about 28,000 employees. So we're getting there. We have an aggressive goal of 50% by the end of the year. So cross your fingers for us.
We have a campaign coming up, a referral campaign to try to drive that up in some new features. So we'll be pretty close.
Yes, we should hopefully get there.
And there was a question about what the app itself was. Do you mind sharing that, or is that
the vendor that we used?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I will talk about that vendor all day. Citrion is the name of the vendor, and it's their One, O-N-E product. It's wonderful, and they're great to work with.
Great. Another one is, it seems you have a small comms team for such a large organization. What tactics or strategies do you use to make the team more efficient, or how do you optimize your work?
It's say yes to high value work, say no to low value work. And Alyssa is possibly one of the most productive people I have ever met. She can,
well, thanks.
She can do more than what anyone can do, or that I can. She can do more in one day that would take me 2 days to do. But the short answer is we work smart and we keep our eye on long-term goals.
It says, do you ever contend with stakeholders who interpret the data differently from you and use it to advocate a bad approach?
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. I can't
Good.
think of an example of that.
Yeah, sure. Are there any questions from the audience, the old-fashioned way with the hands up in the air?
We do mobile, so we get this. That's fine.
And then, going back to the question about, using the data to make a case another way. Having this data is relatively new. I think it's maybe 18, 24 months that we've actually had data. So we have the opportunity to go out and get in front of objections and present it in the way that makes sense for the company. And we've been lucky that they've respected that, and we haven't had a whole lot of pushback.
Great. I'm going to take one more question, I think.
Yeah, we are using Poppulo for past 2 years. Poppulo 1 past year because we're using Newsweaver, right? So What would be your opinion on like best practice? We send a lot of emails, and I know that the number has to be limited every week. What would be your like the best number of emails that you send to employees to the same audience, so they don't get overloaded by the information and they're gonna stop opening the emails?
I'd say we're relatively agile. So once we adopted Poppulo, we were able to take our monthly newsletter, which was a 20-plus page PDF of pictures and stories, and then some departmental news in the back, and then we had a CEO letter that was not painful to write, but it was just painful to get through the approval process. So what we did once we had the analytics from that for the first time ever and realized that we were putting a whole bunch of work into something that wasn't being read, we moved to a weekly email format. So we send our newsletter every Thursday at 2 p.m. It's the 5.5 things to know this week. So 5 important things, and then the half is usually a bonus or something fun, maybe a way to participate in a contest. So that cut down on the amount of one-off emails because we had a standard weekly communication. But we're agile in the one-off emails. Sometimes with Messenger, that's our newsletter coming out on Thursdays, sometimes there's a need to communicate between then. So the general rule is it needs to be actionable. They need to do something immediately. If it's just, this is coming, then that's not worth a one-off email. And we're happy to talk more. There's a whole lot more to that.
We'll be here all day.
That's great. All right, I think we're going to wrap up this session. Thanks again. Can we get another round of applause for the ladies? Fantastic.